You're listening to the Rainmaking Podcast, hosted by high-stakes headhunter, author, and professional speaker, Scott Love.
You're listening to the Rainmaking Podcast, and my name is Scott Love. Did you know that most of your prospective clients, when they're looking for a new service provider, they're 57% of the way through that process of choosing someone? And then you come along. What do? How do you manage that? We're going to talk about that and other lessons learned for winning business with our guest expert today, Mike Mellor. Mike Mellor is a consultant who thinks like an in-house chief marketing officer because he's done that before. He works with small to medium-sized law firms to help them in their business development processes and marketing strategies. Mike's got some great tangible ideas that will help you. Even if you're not in the legal industry, if you're in professional services, definitely listen to the show. There's going to be some significant insights that can help you that will make a difference. I promise you that. As always, this show is sponsored by Leopard Solutions, legal intelligence suite of products, Firmscape, and Leopard BI. Push ahead of the pack with the power of Leopard. Also, remember to check out the show notes for this podcast. Wherever you listen to it, you'll be able to connect with Mike Mellor directly. We've got his website and also his LinkedIn information directly. And if you have a moment, I'd always appreciate a nice 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening, and I hope you get some great ideas from my conversation with Mike Mellor today. Hey, this is Scott Love with the Rainmaking Podcast. Our special guest today is Mike Mellor, and today we're talking about lessons learned for winning business. Mike, thanks for joining me on the Rainmaking Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Scott. Long-time listener, so appreciate it.
Thank you. And I'm a fan of what you post on social media, which is why I asked you to be on the show, because I know you've got some insights that I think can help people. One statistic I want to start with is 57%. You mentioned to me that recently. Tell me about that. Why is that a significant number in terms of what we're talking about today?
Yes, appreciate it. It's a recent Gartner study, the consultancy, who noted that B2B buyers, including law firm buyers, are 57% of the way through the buying cycle. You've got a significantly changed sales cycle than 15 years ago, the last generation of lawyers. And so, making sure that your online presence is literally your reflection, right? It's your front lawn. And so you got to make sure you're mowing it and keeping it all up to speed there. So frequently just trying to build processes and systems that can help attorneys to either automate that process or otherwise streamline it, just to increase realization rates and just make happier folks all around. So
right. I mean, that's a lot. That's a whole thing, right? And so what you mentioned, that 50% of the online buyers, they're 57% of the way through the buying process. That means they're pretty much close to making a decision. Yep. And they come across a professional services firm online, and that firm needs to insert themselves at that part of the buying process. What do you think potential clients for professional services, what are they looking for when they see content, when they see things online? What do you think from their perspective is important to them?
Yeah. Well, they want to know you've done it before. I mean, experience really wins the day. And, a lot of firms that I see, there's not a really centralized way of organizing that, distributing that in the right places in the buyer journey, whether that's through a brochure or, a follow-up or, being prepped for an upcoming meeting or, but folks go in, another joke I kind of have is that a restaurateur doesn't care that, Scott, you form the company and I do the ADA work, right? They want to go back to cooking. And so at the end of the day, are we thinking about how they're coming in and how they're thinking about it? So, I think a lot of folks, try to be the jack of all trades with industry knowledge. And
right.
I think they end up being the master of none there. It's just physically, intellectually impossible to be an expert in every industry in the world. So,
exactly
the riches
right.
are in the niches. And so getting people to just be a little more focused there at that cycle, because, you're out of the game before you're in it. You might get 5 or 6 folks or names, and you're going to research them online, and you might find 2 or 3 folks. Oh my gosh, I'm a sprinkler company. This person has done a $20 million acquisition, $100 million acquisition, a funding round, and people who just put laundry lists of, hey, I did a bunch of 144As, I did a bunch of these and a bunch of these for every industry in the world. Who's going to get the phone call? So just a lot of that focus.
So let me take 3 things that you just talked about here just now. The first one, and these are the 3 things I wanted to kind of go down. You talked about experience wins the day.
You even mentioned something called the buyer's journey, which I think we should talk about, and also kind of developing that niched expertise. But talk first about experience wins the day. I kind of have an idea what that means, but how can we as professional service providers take our experience to showcase it to prospects that are looking for people like us? Tell me about that for a little bit.
Sure. It's really about, figuring out a centralized process, right? Is that going to be tied to your financials? Is it tied to your intake process? You're getting some data at that goalpost, right? Everyone needs to open a new matter. Everyone also needs to bill a matter. So are you taking those kind of, steps and the information that's going to be required, that's going to be input, that's being sent around, outside to the client? Are you bringing that into marketing so that we can sort of sort and organize that? We never know how data or a pitch is going to come up. A request is going to come in. It might be, hey, listen, I want all of the big M&A deals. What have we done around the firm in the last 2 years that were over 500 million and had a PE element? And 4 seconds later, you might get a phone call that says, hey, what have we done in the life sciences space sort of across the transactional and litigation? And so you don't really know how these things are there. So you've got to develop an experience management system. There's a bunch of great off-the-shelf ones, but I'm focused, really on the smaller and mid-sized firms who may not have the resources for a foundation or an NTAP or one of these, sort of monster enterprise systems. So, you can build something in Excel that says, hey, here's the parties involved, here's the date, here's the lead partner, here's the value. Kind of create a list of lists. I know that this is a fashion deal. It's trademark prosecution. It involved an M&A component. We got licensing over here, and being able to sort of code those things so that, you get a phone call and you're able to, in a couple of minutes say, hey, you know what? Here's our Asia-based PE sponsor M&A deals, and you don't think you need it until you do. And having that, 7 or 8 deals that, the firm has done and being able to speak to them intelligently, knowing, who you can follow up with and having a system for that, that's going to improve your win rate significantly.
Yeah, absolutely right. So this is interesting. I mean, a couple of things that you said. Sometimes you don't find out you're out of the game and you never were in it before, and you don't need it until you do. So an experience management system, what is that exactly?
Sure. So, they can come in different forms, but, if you thought about a financial system, an Adderant or something like that, almost having a field in there that said, hey, this is this particular, the client name, you have that matter number. Okay, we might have a general one, but matter 2 might be a corporate deal. Okay, what does that exactly? What does that mean? So having a description of that matter, typically that can be embedded into that financial services so that you can sort of code and understand hours and understand budget and all those types of things. That's perfect. But if you don't have that, even moving into an Excel doc, go back into every pitch you've ever done, every submission you've ever done. Integrate all of that into sort of a central system, code all that, kind of create a consistent template for how those things are written, and making sure that, those are then consistent in all the partner bios, on all your go-to-market pages, on your issue pages, your industry pages, so that folks, you're making it easy for them to say, hey, you know what, this firm has been there doing exactly what I've, exactly the problem I'm trying to solve in the industry I'm trying to solve it in.
So let's just say there's a small to mid-sized firm that's doing this, and they're going through their data. Where have they pitched? Where have they won? Where have they lost? Who did they lose to? I assume that's something they should look at too, if they can find that out. How can that data be used to direct the focus of their niche development? Kind of talking about that other thing that you mentioned.
Yeah. I tell, before anyone sits down to write a plan, I always say, look backwards to look forwards, right? Go back into what are the cases you've worked on over the past 2, 3, 5 years, right? You integrate them and, you may say, hey, you know what, I really focus on financial services. Well, you look back, you've done a bunch of different things. You might find some sort of trends that are bubbling up. Hey, you know what? I didn't think about it this way, but if I'm not thinking about it by litigation topic, but instead by industry, I actually work a lot with financial services firms, whatever the case is, right? And that could really help to inform your strategy and to go forward, to sort of look back. Hey, it also sort of spawns your memory there. What did you really like about working with that client? What did you not like? The other question I ask them is, what's what kind of the buckets? So you 30%, and maybe it's a real estate attorney who's doing 30% acquisition work, 30% leasing work. Okay, what does your utopia look like? Oh, it would be perfect if I could, just work on, retail landlord side leases. Okay, well, everything you do should now be reflective of that, right? I think that, we talked earlier about you being, intimately embedded with, the partners you work with and their plans, right?
Yeah, right.
So
Yeah.
being able to sort of harness that, I think is great. So
That's great. So tell me this then, what is the buyer's journey? You talked about the buyer's journey. I've heard that phrase before, but how would you define that? What's a working definition for us on that?
Sure. I'm always thinking about, how do clients interact with your firm, right? You may notice, and again, you've got to kind of code these clients by industry, by practice, but, understanding how do they come into the firm first? They may come in, do a little bit of trademark work. And we're noticing that our fashion clients typically come in through that. And then maybe they're doing a funding. After that, maybe it's an M&A, potential shareholder litigation or whatever, those types of journeys are. That can, help you to really understand sort of the timing. Hey, what, 6 months after we do an M&A, typically there's a litigation event. Okay, great. Well, can we start to deliver just-in-time content there, kind of based off what we're seeing in terms of those cycles of those clients? Secondarily, you think about sort of correlation analysis, right? Noticing that 70% of our fashion clients who do X also do Y. Well, that can help to inform some of your strategies as well.
That's interesting.
Saying, hey, what? We work with Polo, and they do this and this, but now this other company, they're not doing that. Why is that? Have we not introduced them? Did we miss a step along the way? Are they elsewhere? Let's just, it kind of, should be giving you those different flags to kind of, probe a little more.
So with this correlation analysis, I've never heard that before. I kind of have an idea of what that means. Tell me a time where you worked with a firm and you did that correlation analysis. What were the variables that you looked at and how did that help them win more business?
Sure. Well, just taking a quick step back, I like to refer to data in the 3 I's. You've got industry data, and that's, looking at B-law, saying, hey, what are the trends? We're seeing energy transition in Texas. That's becoming big. The Boston market's getting big with healthcare. That's those types of examples of industry analysis. You have individual analysis, I'll call that. And that's, folks going on your site. What do? They go to the real estate litigation piece. They might download something. Do they forward that? What is Jenny Smith doing? And kind of interacting with our email marketing campaigns, things like that. And then the third one where we're talking about this correlation analysis is the internal data. So that's, understanding, hey, when, our T&E folks are opening a matter, what's the kind of secondary, sort of affiliated practice area that might come up? We might be surprised. We actually found out that was bankruptcy with a lot of the sort of high net worth folks that we worked with. Wouldn't have necessarily thought that, right? But hey, now we know that. Let's start to deliver some content and lead with value for those particular clients. You can instantly point to that because that's what they're telling you, and you're just sort of packaging it in the way that they want it, based off that data. So when it comes to correlation analysis, it really just helps us to kind of bucket maybe sort of like practices or like issues, folks who have, X issue might have Y issue. Okay, great. Well, let's do something with that data. Let's not just kind of use it as a nice to have, but, help that to really inform our strategy. So that's sort of what I'm
This is really interesting. I think this is also an argument for should lawyers be solo or be part of a team. If they're with the larger team, they've got the resources. They have people like you that work in that firm. They really have the expertise and knowledge to really understand how all the data sets interrelate with each other. And more importantly, what does that mean in terms of strategy? Have you worked with firms where they thought it was going to be all IP, but it ended up being bankruptcy, which is where the money was? I mean, what were some of the surprising things that you've seen with your clients?
Yeah, I think, we're seeing a big shift in the go-to-market strategies, a little bit what I was talking about, the restaurateur example earlier, just in, being really versed in all of the business issues that happen, right? Being able to help your clients see those things that are coming around the corner. So I think that industry plays are really big. I think issue plays, when you talk about these big firms, something like COVID happens, or, might have cyber issues. Those are going to be sort of multidisciplinary, not sort of necessarily fitting into really sort of easy boxes. But those are the things that I find bring the most value, because you've got kind of a big firm, it's a single issue, but folks looking at that prism sort of differently. And I think the clients really benefit from that. When I was at Prior, my former role at Prior Cashman as the CMO there, we, putting together different COVID events, right? We had force majeure issues, we had supply chain issues, all the issues that were prevalent, labor issues, the people being furloughed and all this different stuff. We were putting out these, very sort of near time, quick hits. And we ended up doing one just specifically focused on medical and healthcare providers, and just bringing that in, and just kind of that 5% customization of that. The amount of people who showed up at that dwarfed. And so it's a little bit of perception is reality, right? Folks saying, hey, you know what? I'm in that business and this isn't general. They're really talking to me. And, the device may not be incredibly different, but it's just an interesting sort of psychological thing that, people really want that niche, really want that industry focused advice, really want somebody who, they trust is going to be looking around the corners for them. So that's kind of the big surprise is the data, and you think to yourself, maybe, hey, you know what? I want to be all things to all people because I don't want to really focus my bio because if people visit. It's like, would you rather have a 50% chance of winning 5 deals, or would you rather have a 5% chance of winning 100 deals, right? So just kind of getting folks to think like that and being able to point to that data. So it's not just, some talking head coming at them and saying, yeah, you need to do it this way. Let me tell you how to run your business, but pointing to data. So I'm a big fan of it.
This is complex, and we're playing 3-dimensional chess, aren't we? We've got all these different variables and have to understand how they interrelate with each other, and then throw on top of it, why do people buy? And how do we put ourselves in their path when they're ready to make that decision? I like what you talked about, industry plays and issue plays. Are there any other strategic plays along those lines that you think are really good strategies for firms to consider?
So client plays, I think, are, another client team plays, anything that you can kind of use that's going to be very strategic, cause you to really think about that delivery as opposed to sort of these shotgun approaches is always what wins the day. I always told my managers, I don't want to ever really say no, but it is the most important word in vocabulary when you're talking about business plans, because when you can define what you're not, everything else is really easy, right? You decide you're going to kind of figure out an industry. Okay, great. Okay, other opportunities, speaking opportunities, those other things come. Is that in this industry? No, it's not. Okay, you can really keep your eye on the prize, instead of that sort of shiny quarter approach, something hits your inbox. It seems like a cool idea and there's going to be 100 people there. Okay, great. There's no strategy behind that. You're not sort of rolling that up into the content you're writing, people you're talking to, and really having these things sort of be accretive. So, I'm just a huge fan of that sort of, 80-20 rule, right? If you got clients, work really hard on introducing folks and bringing folks in, and always lead with value. And so, how do you lead with value? You create content and insights that, are really applicable to your audience. And so, again, it kind of keeps coming back to, you can only do that in 1 or 2 industries tops. So, being really, really good in a single or double industry, especially as we're seeing this buying cycle change and purchasers just getting a lot smarter before they're picking up the phone. You want to make sure you're in those conversations and in those rooms.
I didn't mean to cut you off, Mike, but I think that applies across the board to any professional services industry. That's something I've learned in my own niche in recruiting, where I've done a lot of IP placements, litigation. I've done white collar investigations, corporate, but then I realized it's a hyper competitive industry. Everybody's getting a call. So how do you create distinction and just niching corporate finance, private equity in that one lane? An ancillary benefit I learned when you develop that focus on that niche, now everything you think about, everything you read, every conversation you have is nuanced towards that niched population.
Yeah.
And you find insights that you wouldn't have come across just because you free up so much of your space in your head, I think. And
that's exactly. And you got that single lens on, and you're viewing those things. How am I going to help clients? How am I going to, you absolutely nail it. Yep.
Yeah. And so let's say somebody's struggling. And let's kind of, as we bring our conversation to a close, and it's very insightful, and I want to have you back on the show because I know there's a lot deeper ways, but we could talk about data. We could have a whole other show just on data, I'm sure. Sure. But let's say somebody's listening and they want to start implementing these ideas that you talked about. If there are 3 action steps you would give them to do so, what would those 3 steps be?
Yeah, thanks. The first would pick a niche and run with it. Work and healthcare. And you do great. You can still say yes, but having a focus, maybe that's fashion or whatever it is, and having everything through that lens, exactly what you talk about, and just your win rates are going to increase exponentially if you can do that and build experience. The second one is taking care of that front lawn, taking care of your digital footprint. Again, the buying cycle changing, folks coming in and looking at your bio, looking to see if you're, solving the problems they have. You're trying to be really general. You're not keeping that thing up to date. You should be looking at your bio probably once a month and your LinkedIn profile and getting on there, probably daily, if not weekly. So we got picking a niche. We've got, optimizing your digital footprint. And the third is be authentic. What's going to work for Jenny across the hall isn't going to work for you. If you don't like to write, don't write. Go speak. Do something that kind of speaks to you, because it shows. When you're authentic about something, you're engaged with it, you enjoy doing it, people want to be around that. And so I think it's about being authentic and leading with value would be my third one. So that's
great. Well, Mike, thank you for being here today. Before you go, tell us about your offerings, your services. What do you do? What do you have that you'd like our listeners to know about?
Sure. I basically help law firms, lawyers, and practice groups to do more with less. How are you optimizing your spend, your time, so you can be most efficient, increase your realization rates, increase your partner value points, and increase your win rates, right? You don't have to spend boatloads of money on different technologies. You've got to build the right systems that work for your culture, and maybe technology can help you, right? So it doesn't have to be an expensive thing, but you've got to get a process in place, and 742 Advisors is here to help you. So
that's great, Mike. Well, we're going to put your LinkedIn link on the show notes and also your company's website link on the show notes. So everybody listening, go to the show notes wherever you hear this podcast, and you'll be able to connect with Mike directly. And Mike, I'd love to have you back on the show to go deeper onto some of these concepts that you talked about. Thanks so much for sharing your wisdom and for being a guest on the show today, Mike.
Really appreciate it, Scott. Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to the Rainmaking Podcast. For more information about our recruiting services for international law firms, visit our website at attorneysearchgroup.com. To inquire about having Scott speak at your next convention, conference, sales meeting, or executive retreat, visit therainmakingpodcast.com.